The directive came through encrypted channels at midnight, sterile and absolute. Director Voss didn't even have the courtesy to deliver it in person, just text on a darkened screen. Asset acquisition approved. Compensation, 2.3 million credits. Transport at dawn. Cale sat in his cramped office at the Salvage Authority, staring at the coordinates attached to the message. He'd been following orders for 17 years without hesitation, climbing from field operative to senior acquisition specialist. Orders were order. Morality was compartmentalized and filed away, but this was different. He'd already been surveilling the location for 3 weeks, a crash site in the Kepler region where an unregistered vessel had come down. Standard protocol dictated immediate confiscation of any non-human life forms. He'd executed similar directives before: capture, contain, catalog. The directive always came down from someone higher up the chain, and he never questioned why. This time, his team had photographed them. The images haunted him all morning. An alien female with silvery skin that seemed to hold light, her form both delicate and powerful. 2 juveniles clustered against her, their enormous eyes reflecting terror and trust in equal measure. In one photo, the mother had her appendages wrapped around them, a gesture of protection so achingly universal that Cale couldn't unsee it. His partner, Holloway, had knocked on his door at 4 a.m., coffee in hand and that familiar gleam in his eye. "Big payday," he'd said simply. "Command's got buyers lined up. The mother's going to some collector in the outer settlements. The young ones," he'd paused, something dark flickering across his face, "they've got separate buyers." Separate buyers. The words had landed like a stone in Cale's chest. By 5 a.m., he was driving alone through pre-dawn darkness, telling himself he was doing preliminary reconnaissance. The crash site was abandoned, the family hadn't fled. They were still there, huddled in the shattered hull of their vessel, the mother's luminous eyes tracking his every movement as he approached. She didn't run. She didn't attack. She simply watched him with an intelligence that transcended the species barrier. Calculating whether this armed human represented salvation or damnation, Cale holstered his weapon. "I'm not here to take you," he heard himself say. "I'm here to help you escape." The mother's breathing seemed to stutter. One of the juveniles made a soft, questioning sound. Cale realized his hands were shaking. He just made a choice that would dismantle everything he'd built. The safe house was supposed to be temporary, just somewhere off the grid while he figured out next steps. Instead, it had become a sanctuary, and Cale had become something he'd never expected: a guardian. He'd given them names from Earth's mythology, since their original designations were unpronounceable. The mother became Isla. The eldest juvenile, with darker patches along his shoulders, became Theron. The smaller one, whose delicate features held an almost ethereal quality, became Arya. The first week was chaos. Isla refused most Earth food, surviving on the emergency rations Cale had salvaged from the crash site. She grew weaker, her luminous skin losing its radiance. He sat with her through those long nights, learning her language through patient mimicry, through gesture and expression. She'd touch his hands so different from human hands, with 5 slender digits and a warmth that bordered on fever, and speak in liquid, musical tones. "You don't have to stay," she told him one night, her eyes searching his face. "I can feel your conflict. Your people. They call you back." "Let them call," Cale replied. He meant it. By the second week, everything changed. Cale had managed to synthesize an amino acid compound based on the crash site's life support data. Isla consumed it cautiously, then with increasing urgency. Within 48 hours, her color returned, that luminous silver brightening like a star emerging from shadow. She'd wrapped her arms around him, And he'd held her, this being who was simultaneously alien and heartbreakingly familiar in her gratitude and emotion. Her skin carried that same heat, and he could feel the thrumming of something like a heartbeat, or perhaps something his physiology had no reference point for. "Thank you," she'd whispered against his chest. The children adapted faster than their mother. Theron became fascinated by Cale's extensive music collection, the juveniles fascinated by human instruments. Cale taught them his old guitar, their delicate fingers creating haunting melodies that filled the safe house with something almost like joy. Arya preferred studying. He'd set up a basic data terminal, and she consumed information with voracious hunger, learning English in days. Teaching Cale Isla's people's history in return. Late one night, Isla found him in the kitchen trying to synthesize another batch of her food. She watched him work, then guided his hands, showing him adjustments, her touch lingering. When she'd finished, she turned to face him fully, and Cale realized how much closer they'd grown. "In my culture," she'd said softly, "when one saves a life, they become bonded to it, responsible for it. We don't take that lightly." "Neither do I," Cale had replied. She'd leaned forward, and he'd allowed himself to kiss her tentatively, reverently, aware of every difference between them and finding none of them mattered. Her skin had warmed under his touch, and he'd felt it, that sense of connection that transcended evolution. Biology, the vast gulf between their worlds dot by the third week. Cale had stopped checking his messages from the Authority. There was no going back now. He'd become something other than what he'd been. He'd become hers. The knock on the door came on a Tuesday. Holloway stood in the threshold, weapon drawn, 3 armed officers flanking him. Cale's stomach dropped. He'd known this was coming, had played out various scenarios in his mind for weeks, but knowing and experiencing were entirely different things. "Stand down." "Cale," Holloway said, his voice carrying something that might have been regret. "Director Voss is giving you one chance to surrender the assets and face termination rather than trial. That's generous considering." Behind Cale, he could sense Isla and the children tensing. He taught them basic protocols for this scenario, but protocols were meaningless against armed authority officers. He slowly raised his hands. "They're not assets," Cale said quietly. "They're refugees. Their vessel was damaged. They were dying." "Irrelevant," Holloway replied, but his jaw tightened. "We have a traction order under Section 7. You're harboring unregistered extraterrestrial life. That's treason, buddy. The only reason you're still breathing is Director Voss's fondness for you." "Then I'm grateful," Cale said, "but I'm not moving." For a moment, the tableau froze. Then Holloway sighed, and something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, of the man he'd once known. "You're going to throw your life away for them?" "Yes," Cale said simply. "Then you're a bigger fool than I thought." Holloway stepped into the house, weapon raised. What happened next was simultaneous. Theron's bioluminescence flared, a pass, defensive mechanism Cale had observed but never seen weaponized. The burst of light blinded the officers momentarily. Arya moved with surprising speed, somehow disabling the leading officer's weapon. Isla reached for Cale, her expression desperate, but Cale didn't move to fight. Instead, he stood between them and the officers and raised his hands higher. "I'm not resisting. Take me. But understand that if you harm them, you'll answer to more than just me. The Kepler Coalition has been looking for legitimate refugees. The neutral territories will grant asylum." It was a bluff, a dangerous one. But Holloway faltered. In that moment of hesitation, Cale saw the possibility of another path. "You're claiming they're protected persons?" Holloway asked slowly. "I'm claiming they have rights under the Interstellar Refugee Accord, which supersedes Authority Protocol. And I'm claiming that I have evidence of systematic exploitation that Director Voss has been conducting with unregistered species. Files, names, buyers, all of it. It was another bluff, but a more credible one. Cale did have that information, had been quietly compiling it for weeks. Holloway's expression cycled through several emotions. Then he lowered his weapon slightly. "You're really throwing it all away." "I'm saving it," Cale replied. "I'm saving what actually matters." The standoff lasted another 30 seconds before Holloway ordered his officers to stand down. He stared at Cale for a long moment, and there was something like sorrow in his eyes. "I'll give you a head start," he finally said. "Not as your partner, as someone who remembers who you used to be. You've got maybe 6 hours before they send a real team. Use it." They left in darkness. In the cargo shuttle Cale had stolen from the Authority depot, a risk that would permanently mark him as a fugitive. But there was no other choice. Isla sat in the pilot's seat beside him, her fingers light on his shoulder as he navigated through the outer atmospheric corridors. The children were secured in the passenger hold, asleep finally after the terror of the Authority's arrival. The shuttle hummed around them, carrying them toward the neutral territories and whatever sanctuary they could find there. "You've lost everything," Isla said softly. "Your career, your world, your people." "My people now," Cale replied, glancing at her. "You, Theron Arya, that's my people." She was quiet for a moment, then leaned down and kissed the top of his head, a gesture of acceptance, of bond. "In my culture, there's a bonding ceremony. We don't have the traditional elements here, but the meaning," she paused, seeming to search for words. "The meaning is that two become one, that their fates intertwine completely." "I want that," Cale said. "Whatever it is, whatever it means. I want it." Isla moved to the co-pilot's seat and pulled up a data file she'd been composing. It was a ceremony ancient, beautiful, written in flowing script that seemed to shimmer with bioluminescence. She read it aloud in her liquid language, then translated each passage for him. Vows of protection and care. Vows of growth and understanding. Vows of family. By the time they reached the edge of the neutral territories, they had conducted something sacred between the stars. The Kepler Coalition received them cautiously, but not hostilely. Cale's evidence about the Authority's exploitation programs, combined with the refugee status they could establish for Isla and the children, created just enough legal protection. Not safety, never true safety, but a foothold. They found a small settlement on one of the peripheral colonies, a place where different species coexisted in fragile, respectful balance. A place where a human and an alien could build something without constant fear. 2 years later, Cale watched his daughter, his biological daughter, with Isla, though that term felt inadequate for what she was, take her first steps toward him across the small garden they'd cultivated. Her skin shimmered with hints of both human warmth and Isla's luminescence, a bridge between their worlds. He'd named her Nova. Theron, now adolescent and growing into his own powerful form, was working with the settlement's defense team. He'd chosen to protect others like he'd been protected. Arya had become the settlement's primary educator, teaching both human and alien children, building understanding across the species divide. Isla was in the kitchen. He could hear her humming one of Theron's melodies while preparing evening meal, a fusion of Earth and Viridian cuisine that somehow worked. She'd thrived here in ways that would have been impossible in his previous world. And Cale was simply home. The news feed still occasionally mentioned the Authority's investigations into his disappearance, now classified as a security incident of the highest order. Director Voss had been exposed. Cale's evidence, along with testimonies from other freed specimens, had dismantled his entire operation. It wasn't justice exactly, but it was something. He no longer thought in terms of orders and obedience. He thought in terms of love, of responsibility freely chosen, of a family built against impossible odds. That evening, as Nova finally found her footing and toddled into his arms, Isla wrapped her appendages around both of them. Theron and Arya appeared in the doorway, drawn by Nova's delighted squealing. "We're a family," Arya said, still slightly surprised by the concept after growing up without one. "We are," Cale confirmed, holding them close. And he realized that his greatest achievement was never going to appear on any official record. It wouldn't earn him accolades or recognition, but it was infinitely more valuable than anything his former career could have offered. He had chosen compassion over obedience, love over duty, and in doing so, he had found something he didn't know he'd been searching for: belonging. True, transcendent, irrevocable belonging. The shocked reactions to his defiance had faded into history. But here, in this small garden on a distant colony, Cale understood that his real shock had been discovering that the most human thing he could do was to love across the boundaries that supposedly defined him. And in saving them, he'd saved himself.